Hello and welcome to Space Between Ideas. I'm Blank Gates. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So let's get going. We got a lot to cover today. I only got about 20 minutes, so let's get going right away. Uh, we are continuing our effort to understand the book called it's The Wealth and Poverty of Nations by David Lanz, and we are now in chapter two. Chapter two was very interesting, and in fact, this whole process was very interesting. Let's give you a little. And this is crazy, right? So horse breeds, height comparison. That's what we're going to try to reach today. Is we need to get to the point where we can talk about these horse breeds. But before we can talk about these horse breeds, we need to begin our presentation. Uh, where's our presentation? Geographical destiny. Geographical destiny. All right, let's take a look. Share this PPT and change the view a little bit so you can see everything. There we go. All right, geography as destiny, divergent paths of Europe and China. Now, I would say that in general, the concept, like the stuff that they talked about China was, actually, I do speak Chinese, which is strange probably for some people. I do speak Chinese. I have an undergraduate degree in Chinese law, China, I guess you could say China law. I lived, I lived in China for 10 years. So I'm well versed in the basics of China. But I mean, even after living in China for all those many years, um, I don't know. So now I have a Chinese tutor. I decided to kind of revisit and start to work on my Chinese again. I also speak Russian. I take a Russian lesson each week, and now I'm learning French. And I'm reading all these books. And why? Because you got this crazy guy named Trump, and I don't know. It's just like I'm watching YouTube videos all day long, and I can't understand how is it that we have like I thought America was supposed to be the good guy. We watched all these Hollywood movies growing up, and America was the good guy, and then now he's like, Iran, we're going to destroy your whole civilization. I thought you just wanted regime change. No, we want to kill all of them and all of their babies. And it's like, what? You want to destroy a whole civilization? Why? Because they got to open those straits of. It's like what straits of Hormuz? It's so crazy. Like I can't understand the world right now. That's why I ran back into the books and said, okay, let's go back into history, find out what brought us to this craziness where America is no longer the source of truth and righteousness. Where are we? What is going on in this world? Geography. All right, so let's read this. I didn't actually read this yet. I read the text, but I didn't go through the slides. So we're going to do some reading. We're going to read these slides. We're going to try to get through this in 20 minutes. All right, let's go. Geography as destiny. It looks like we got Europe on the left side and we got China on the right side. The divergent paths of Europe and China. Fertility trap. Civilization does not start where conditions are best, it starts where barriers are lowest. What? Civilization does not start where conditions are best. It starts where barriers are lowest. Okay, so thanks, Notebook LM. I don't know where you got that sentence from. The fertility trap. The most fertile land in Europe was initially unreachable. Early settlers farmed lake shores and grasslands, not because the soil was superior, but because it was accessible with stone and bronze tools. The rich, heavy clay soils of northern European plains sat locked beneath hardwood forests. Okay, I don't know. I should have probably looked into this before. So we looked at this last time, and it's a very interesting image where it's talking about the world climate zones. And when I started reading the book, it talked about how it has this bulge. It says the bulge of Brazil. I don't actually agree because the thing is that there's a line right here, and the gravitational forces is what creates this current. The current, it heats up the water, and then it brings this hot water, warm water into this region, and you can see how the hot water is pushed, and it's called the something jet. What is it? What is this thing called? The jet? Something jet? Anyway, so you can see how the green area, the temperate zone, is really far north. The reason why the temperate zone is so far north is because this warm water is is pushed up into this region. And the same thing happens over here. So the reason why we have this huge temperate zone in the northwest of Canada is because we have these currents that bring this warm water. It brings the warm water through here, through Japan and the northern China, and then over into this part of North America. This also provides an opportunity for like rain, a lot of good rain, and the evaporation is slow, and it provides harvest. And the main idea here is that we have a lot of food. And so last week when I talked about what's going on in Africa, we talked about some of the problems that they had with rain and the geography and with pests and with all kinds of things which kept Africa down for many, many, many years, and which is like, sometimes people like to talk about, like, I don't know. So my video it was called like, "Am I a racist?" And the point was not, "Am I a racist?" but it was like, "Is geography racist?" And that's the point. Is like geography tells the history of the world, and one of the main reasons is because of food. So I'm not really sure what's going on here in this slide, because that's not actually the main idea. All right, so here it is. So you can see the Gulf Stream. It's called the Gulf Stream. So the geological accident created Europe's first unfair advantage. The bulge of Brazil defects the Gulf Stream northward, carrying warm Caribbean water across the Atlantic. Britain and North Europe enjoy temperatures 10 to 15 degrees warmer than their latitude should allow. The Siberian and Labrador sit at the exact same latitude, yet remain frozen wastelands. Europe did not earn its climate, it inherited it. Okay, so the idea here is that when you have this climate, then you can have 2 or 3 yields per year. You have a lot of food, and that food is going to help your population. Now, the problem here is that maybe I'll go into this a little bit deeper later on. Actually looks like Istanbul. I'm not really sure what this is supposed to be. Okay, never mind. All right, so rain is democratic, rivers are not. This is an interesting point in the book. So it's talking about Egypt, and it goes into this idea. And actually, because of the Passover and Easter in the last 2 weeks, I've had the chance to read Exodus and to go through to read up about the rituals in Exodus chapter 12. And it's talking about the children of Israel. And the children of Israel, they lived in Egypt for 430 years. And eventually Moses, he's able to perform some kinds of magic tricks. And he's claiming that it was God that gave him this ability to perform these magic tricks. And eventually what happens is he's able to take his people out of Egypt. But the thing is, how did they get into Egypt in the first place? So if you go back to, the reading from a couple of weeks ago in the Bible, if you've been following, some kind of like read the Bible in a year kind of pattern, then last week what we were reading about was when Joseph and the coat of many colors. So Joseph, he's the son of what? Who? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And then Jacob changes his name to Israel. And then Israel, he has 12 sons, and one of his sons is Joseph. And then Joseph, the coat of many colors. So they sell this guy into Egypt, and then he's in Egypt. And then there's a problem with the famine. Okay, so what are we talking about famine? The whole point of the famine is that in Egypt, it's a river culture. And so when you have a river culture, then it means that you have a culture who is controlling. So it's almost like a mafia or a mob or a cartel. So the government, whoever controls the food, controls the government. And because the river was what was providing the food, so then you can have a dictatorship or an authoritarian government, because the food was produced in such a small area. Whereas when we talk about Western Europe, then you have rain all over the place. And so people could be anywhere, and it was more democratic, meaning that everybody was far away from each other and they were just doing their own thing. The map of a locked room. So the hardwood forest. Now, but the problem was that, in the couple of thousand years BCE, before the Common Era, you have this beautiful geography that allows for amazing growth of plant life. But the problem was hardwood. The hardwood forests of northern Europe formed an impenetrable wall, stone and bronze tools not could not fell oak and beech, leaving the fertile, heavy clay soils entirely inaccessible. Iron did not just make better tools, it unlocked the entire geography. The people with the best land did not win. The people with the cheapest, non most accessible iron won, and then used it to claim the best land. The tools preceded the civilization. Okay, so the geography actually provided for the opportunity for people who were living close to lakes. They had amazing soil, they had great farms, but there was all this wood. There were all these trees, oak trees, all over the place, but they couldn't do it with bronze. They couldn't do it with copper. It was too soft. And they couldn't do it with stones even. So eventually, then how did they unlock this amazing plant life? During patient during turning patience into aggression. Before iron, humans killed trees slowly through girdling, cutting the ring around the bark, and waiting years for it to rot while farming in its shadow. With iron axes came active clearing, cut, pull, plow. Humans could now conquer the land in a single season. The shift from girdling to clearing is the shift from negotiating with geography to dominating it. All right, so that same geography that allowed for these amazing, huge trees to grow in Western Europe is also what prevented them from having huge farms. But then eventually, with the Iron Age, once they were able to produce iron, then they were able to cut down those trees. The living tank, all right, Europe's heavy horse was not just a weapon, it was an energy machine. Fed on oats grown in newly iron plowed fields, it could plow more land, move more goods, and fight harder than any Mongolian pony. The horse collar, a European innovation, transferred pulling force from the throttle to the shoulders, tripling the animal's effective work output. The horse that won the farm also won the war. All right. So then the book it transfers from the concept of like, okay, so Western Europe had this huge advantage. Once we moved into the Iron Age, it had this huge advantage where not only could it cut down all these trees, but then it had this huge amount of sustenance. It had all of these calories, and then they started feeding these calories to their animals, and their animals started getting bigger and stronger. And not only were they able to use these animals to produce more food and to be able to do more farming, but they also were very useful when it came to war. And so the Mongolians, their horses were much smaller, and eventually the Mongolians, although I mean this was the original Satanists. I mean my understanding of Satan, the devil, the evil devil, is very simple. Those who murder and steal, those are satanic. And the opposite is voluntary self sacrifice. If you've been watching Jordan Peterson's work over the last several years, he's been really focusing on this concept of voluntary self sacrifice. That is when you understand your position inside of your family, and you have your family inside of a community, and your community is inside of a village or a city, and your city is inside of a larger community. And so it's nested in all of these larger and larger, and then you do your best, you give your voluntary self-sacrifice, you use your time and energy to bring some kind of benefit to society. And then the opposite, Satanism, is very simple. It's those who murder and steal. And this is why we're like, why do we call Trump the Epstein class? Because they, for their own self aggrandizement, they are preying upon children, they are murdering, and they are stealing. It's very simple. And then why did we allow someone like that into our government? Why do we allow those people to control our societies? It's mind-boggling. Why is it that Western democracies were supposed to be those who are righteous, those who are good, those who are centered on the concept of voluntary self-sacrifice, but then suddenly it's like murder and theft. We want your oil and we're going to kill all your people. That's a Satanist. That is Satanist. Whew. All right, so the Mongolians, they decided they wanted to go and they wanted to rape and kill and steal. But unfortunately, eventually they were kicked out of the zone because big, strong, what, horses? I don't know if that's exactly what. All right, let's keep going. Nutritional spiral. So European agriculture created a self-reinforcing advantage. Iron tools cleared land to feed animals. Animals produced manure to fertilize soil. Higher yields fed more people and livestock. The continent fed itself into dominance. Meat and dairy diets produce physically larger, stronger workforces than grain only diets capable of swing heavier tools and build more infrastructure. Okay, so there you go. So now when you look at this, what's the combination here? So it's a combination of what? It's a combination of the iron axe, we have iron tools, and what? It's not abundant crops and stronger farmer. So this is actually not the beginning. So remember, if we go back, in fact, the beginning was the rain. So it's the Gulf Stream because they had rain. That's what produced these forests. That's what produced the conditions to be able to farm. And then once the people had the iron, then that is what enabled people to clear the forests and then to create grazing cattle, and then they produced manure, and then they had fertile fields, and then abundant crops and stronger farmer. So Europe, why did we have Europe? Why is Europe so powerful? Because of the rain? It's crazy. Because of the rain and the iron. So it's still geography. It's geography that allowed them to become. All right, so let's shift over into Asia. The rice logic. Rice is a miracle crop and a biological trap. It produces more calories per hectare than almost any other crop, feeding far more people per acre than European grain farming. Rice is extraordinarily water intensive, requiring approximately 1,100 liters of water to produce a single kilogram of rice. More calories, more people, more mouths to feed, need even more rice. The crop that prevented starvation also prevented escaping from subsistence. What does subsistence mean? I've actually been to parts of China where they have the tier farming, and I have some crazy stories about that. Yeah, but let's continue. Substituting labor for land. When you cannot clear the land, you put more hands on the same plot. Rice farming demands weeding by hand, transplanting seedlings one by one, managing water to the inch, energy return on investment. The energy return is real, but it consumes every available hour of every available person. There's no surplus time, no surplus labor, no room for invent, trade, and explore. Maximize calories, maximize freedom. This is China. So it's interesting because it's telling us that the Chinese culture is this concept of like every human can work. Everyone works. Everyone produces food. Everyone farms. And if we all work, then we can produce like a bigger society. We can produce more energy. We can produce more food. So this is like human labor. Now look over there. So look in Europe, they were using animals to do this type of farming, and they had the advantage of the rain and the fertile soil. And then over here in Asia, they're producing people, and the more people they produce, that's what produces the food, and the more food, then that's what produces the more people. It's wild. Okay, so I don't know where this actually I couldn't find this in the material. So the hydraulic state, the Yellow River gives life, but it also destroys everything. It floods catastrophically, shifts course, and killed millions. No independent farmer could manage the Yellow River alone. Managing the river required a massive centralized bureaucracy, engineering, administration, tax collectors, soldiers. The state became indispensable. The river did not just feed China, it also built its government. So this is I don't actually remember this part of the book, so I don't know how it produced this, but it's interesting because it talks about Egypt, and the reason why Egypt was like an authoritarian government was because all of the food was produced in such a small amount of land, like right on the edge of the river. And then Europe, in its early development, they were able to develop in these little pockets all over the place because the people were distributed, and so that's how the government was also distributed. And then here they're saying that in China, because of these huge issues that they had with geography, they had to have some kind of government that was able to manage these issues with geography, and that's what built their government. And it makes sense, right? So it's saying that the purpose of government is to produce food and to manage the population. Population treadmill had no off-switch. To maintain immense calorie output required to feed a dense population, the state actively discouraged leisure. Festivals were strictly limited, migration was heavily restricted. Every able body was bound to the land, the paddy, or the canal. The system that fed hundreds of millions of also bound them to it permanently, producing became the cage. So the government was like, work, work, work. We have to work, otherwise we don't have enough food. The biological tax, the intensive farming demand hidden biological costs to maintain soil fertility without vast herds of animals. Chinese farmers recycled human waste, night soil, directly back into the field. Efficient, necessary, devastating. This created a direct pipeline for intestinal parasites. A population riddled with chronic parasites worked at a fraction of its physical potential. Fertilizers that fed millions also weakened them. Divergent bets on population. We got 2 minutes. Two contrasting democratic strategies for survival. Europe. The eldest son inherited the whole farm. Younger sons must delay marriage, leave home, find work, start new farms. Result: slower population growth, intense labor migration, and innovation from displaced youth. China, universal marriage. Everyone marries young, everyone has children. The result is maximum population, maximum available labor, and a treadmill that never stopped demanding more calories. The diagnostic matrix, the geographical input dictated the civilizational output. I don't even know how to read this chart. Two paths to empire: Europe and China. So technology revealed that geography hides. Europe and China did not succeed because one was inherently superior to the other. They succeeded because they perfectly adapted for the distinct geographical traps and miracles they inherited. One system built empires through surplus food, the other built them through surplus people. That's it. All right, so we got 30 seconds. I'm interested to see what's going to happen. Week one, we got week 1 to 7. We're still in week 1 to 7. So that means that what the next we're still in the wealth of, we're in chapter 4 now, or is it chapter 3? That's chapter 4. Chapter 3. Okay, we're still in wealth and poverty of nations. So go ahead and read chapter 3, and also then after that we're going to read chapter 4. So read chapter 3, also read chapter 4. When do we get out of this book? So we got another 2 weeks of wealth and poverty of nations until, what's the next book? I don't know. Kingelberg. Which book is Kingelberg? I don't know. We'll figure it out next week. I gotta leave, but there you go. So that's another week here on Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.